I moved to a new town after a bad breakup with a girl and I met a guy friend. I didn't realize he was actually asking me out. Should I tell my friend that I didn't realize we were dating? Last year I had to move in with my parents because I was having a hard time finding a new place to rent after a really bad breakup. My parents and I don't get along great for a lot of reasons and it made everything a lot worse, so to get out of it I eventually decided to apply for some jobs in other places. At the time I really didn't want to since I'd lived in that city my whole life and I liked my job. But I just couldn't stay with my parents anymore. I found a job pretty quickly because this hotel was reopening after changing owners and they weren't finding staff easily. So I ended up moving here in October. In the beginning I wasn't socializing much because it's really hard to find friends here when everyone already knows everyone. My country and region are doing well, no confirmed cases in town yet, but it definitely didn't help with making friends. I've also been pretty busy because I decided to buy a house. It just kinda happened because my boss knew the previous owners and it was super cheap since it needed a lot of work, but it definitely made this move feel very permanent. Then in May this guy, let's call him Eric, and I got stuck in the social distancing queue outside the pharmacy together and started talking. I told him I was new and he invited me to a barbecue with his friends. NGL, I'm not great with new people but they made me feel welcome and were all very nice. After that we just kept hanging out. Mostly me and Eric, which I thought was because he was quite careful during these times and only saw his big group of friends outside. Plus we were the only two who weren't in a relationship or had kids, so it made sense in my head that we were alone a lot. I'd cook him dinner/lunch, I'm a chef, and he'd show me great hiking places and help out a lot with the renovations on the house. I also started telling him about the breakup and stuff, and even though I feel like I've moved on, it was still nice that he was so understanding. Like, I always thought it sounded so cheesy when people talked about knowing like a week into a friendship or relationship that it was going to be different, but that's the only way I can describe what it's felt like. I promise now that I'm writing it down it's so obvious, but I honestly didn't think much of it since I've never dated a guy before. Then like 2 to 3 weeks ago he called and asked if I wanted to have dinner on my next night off and also said just you and me. He seemed kinda weird and formal but I assumed it was something else going on and just said yes. To which he responded it's a date then, and I assumed he meant that as a joke. Why line? Because I have friends who have in the past. He picked this restaurant in another town that was relatively fancy that I'd never been to and I drove him home afterwards and he told me goodnight and that he'd had a great time. Usually we're not that formal with each other but we weren't really acting that different during dinner, so again I didn't think much of it. Then over the next week or so he started sending hearts in texts and would call me some pet names here and there, which is the first thing that stood out to me a lot. Then earlier this week he grabbed my hand while we were out during his lunch break and that's when it finally clicked. It really caught me by surprise and I didn't know how to react, so I tried to play it cool and go along with it. Then yesterday he texted and asked if we were still on for our movie night on Sunday and I just said yeah of course, and I'm starting to panic a bit. I grew up pretty conservative and I guess didn't question my sexuality a lot, even when I got to university and a lot of other people were. I've always been awkward when it comes to that stuff and I never really made the first move with any of the girls I've dated. But I've been thinking about it for the last few days and I've realized I really like him and all the stuff he's done never made me uncomfortable. Quite the opposite actually. He's cute, definitely what I would have said is my type but like a guy version. And it feels different than any friendship I've ever had. Like again, looking back I definitely haven't been acting super platonic with him and we've gotten close really fast, and if I'm being honest if he'd been a girl I also would have assumed that's where this was going. I guess my issue is, should I tell him next time I see him that I didn't realize we were dating? Should I wait? Does he need to know? I don't want him to feel embarrassed that he assumed or think that I'm using him to figure myself out, but I also don't want to lie. I genuinely want to see where this goes since he makes me really happy. Update. So we had our dinner/movie night yesterday and I was very nervous. Mostly because I was scared that how new it was to me was going to be a deal breaker. But Eric came over and I think he instantly realized I was acting weird. He didn't say anything while he was helping me cook, but then when we sat down to eat he almost immediately asked what was up. So I basically said something like I really like you and I want to see where this goes, but I want you to know it's very new to me and I'm not sure you're cool with that. And he asked what exactly was new to me and I said I'd only dated girls before, which then led to a conversation where I couldn't avoid telling him that I didn't realize we were dating until that lunch. He actually got really quiet for a few seconds after that and I was scared he was upset, but then he just laughed. Basically, he thought I'd been flirting with him for quite some time. Looking back I probably was, just not intentionally, and all of his friends had been saying like he seems so into you. It's really obvious, he's probably just too shy to make the first move. He even mentioned some other stuff we or I had done that I gotta admit definitely doesn't sound platonic when he retells it, so I can see why they thought that and ultimately they were right I guess. And, during that lunch he'd apparently thought I was reaching to grab his hand, so he reached out too. Otherwise he probably wouldn't have done it because he said he's never been good at making the first move physically. He said when he asked me to dinner that was a huge deal and his friends had tried to hype him up for a while, and that's probably why I didn't realize that he was asking me out since he was super nervous. Anyway, we ended up talking a lot after dinner. He didn't come out publicly, aside from a few close friends, until a year or so ago either. So he definitely understood that I don't have a lot of experience. He hasn't had a lot of relationships in general, at least not any proper and public ones, since he hadn't come out, and it's a pretty conservative area so there aren't a lot of guys who are out of the closet here. He actually admitted that he'd even been nervous to talk to me that first time we met since I looked kind of lumberjack. Why? His words not mine, though the day we met I think I hadn't shaved in a while, so I don't doubt it. And he also knows rumors travel fast here, especially when someone doesn't really fit in. So I guess he was worried that I'd fit the small town conservative type or have heard all the gossip. The whole it's a date thing for example would never happen between two guys who are just friends here. I've definitely noticed the culture and it's something we talked about too, since being out here isn't always easy. So we might try to keep it low key at first and mostly tell his friends and some of mine. I could probably ramble on about him and what we talked about for a long time, but to keep it short it was a really nice talk and we want to take it slow, but we also realize we've basically been half dating since May, so it felt weird not to make it official. So I guess I've got a boyfriend now. Thanks guys.